Danielson, and her main theory is really looking at teacher effectiveness in the classroom. I'm hoping to keep us under 10 minutes. So far, the last couple of times we've kind of gone around there, so we'll see what happens. Just some general biography about her. She was born in West Virginia. She moved to Princeton during high school, and then between Princeton and moving to New Jersey with her husband, she was in various different areas, for example, like DC. And then now she leads the research group called the Danielson Group at Princeton to advance the principles of her framework that she first developed in the 90s, a framework for teaching. And then talking about specifically her educational background, which I think is a little more interesting. She graduated from Cornell with a history degree in Chinese history specifically, a master's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University. So not so far on the educational pathway that we all usually think people start on. But then she then earned her another master's degree in educational administration and supervision 12 years later from obtaining her first master's, this time from Rutgers. And this happened because while working at DC as a junior economist in different think tanks and policy organizations, she was motivated by teaching from these inner city kids that she would see all the time in DC. Because of this, she then received her teaching credentials and worked specifically at elementary schools. And then when she moved to New Jersey with her husband, she worked her way up, starting from just a general teacher to curriculum director, staff developer, and then program designer. This was at many different locations, including in ETS in Princeton. And then from here, she was a developer and trainer of observations and assessment. And this is where she first developed her framework in '96, which was called the Enhancing Professional Practice, a Framework for Teaching. And that framework of teaching is what she's really known for and what her group tries to advance every single day. And it's really divided into 4 different domains for teaching: planning and preparation, school environment, instruction, and professional responsibilities. And then it also allows you to understand a teacher's level of expertise, which is great on a 4-point scale from unsatisfactory to distinguished. And the reasoning why they use this unsatisfactory to distinguished scale is because they believe that you can't put a letter grade or a number to a teacher's understanding, because you have to actually go in there and observe it and reflect upon their teaching. Sort of like what we do with students sometimes nowadays with some people, with some teachers. Their grade isn't necessarily determined of what they know, it's what they can show you what they can do. And that framework for teaching has evolved into creating communities of practice, framing discussions about teaching, and many different other areas. I'll mostly talk about creating communities and framing discussions later on. And this is just a quick overview of her framework of teaching for different domains. As you can see, like just pointing out some, like first in planning and preparation, demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. I think that's a really, really important one. And if you don't really know what content pedagogy is, I recommend that you look through that by yourself, as I don't have time to cover it all. Classroom environment, establishing a culture for learning, so importance of content. Managing student behavior is a big one, like we've talked about too with our textbook readings. Professional responsibilities. So you're reflecting upon your teaching. This is a big one because I call myself a reflective practitioner in teaching. So I'm always reflecting upon my teaching, getting student feedback so I can change it to better suit their needs, not my needs, so they can better succeed. And then instruction, communicating with students, engaging the students in learning is a big one, using assessment in instruction. And demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness to the students, right? Your response to the students, as it says. And the framework for teaching was really constructed from constructivism, ironically. Constructivism was founded by John Piaget. Piaget first defined constructivism as how people make meaning of their interaction of experiences, ideas. So what they take from their experiences and how they evolve that into, or what they make meaning of it. But it now has evolved into a theory which that learners are actively involved in the process of making new knowledge. So they learn by expanding their knowledge with experiences through play that are necessary for learning, and then they take these learning experiences and they construct knowledge from it from a prior base of knowledge that they've learned earlier. Um, I really highly recommend that if you look at constructivism more, it's a very, very good theory. I consider myself a constructivist also, but there are similarities to the framework of teaching, because constructivism defines the role of teachers is to model, coach, and scaffold, which you can see there's bits and pieces of that in the different domains of the framework for teaching. And then just some implications of this framework in modern classrooms. With the all new technology that we see being used in classrooms and teaching strategies especially, this framework can be readily applied to these new experiences to gauge how teaching is going on in the classroom. Because now it's not as much as just a teacher standing up in front of the classroom, going through the whiteboard, writing stuff on the board. They're using smart boards, they're using their computers, they're using all different kinds of technology. They're using active learning, which is a huge one, right? The students are actively involved in the learning process now rather than just sitting in their chairs, listening and writing stuff down. And then now, talking about the two I mentioned earlier, creating communities of practice among teachers. Really, you're not using grades as a determiner of teacher effectiveness like we talked about before, which is what the framework does. You're using observations and reflections of other teachers that lead to describing teacher effectiveness. So you're creating a community among those teachers by looking at themselves, observing themselves or other teachers. And then also framing discussions with other teachers in the school can be really important too. But with these discussions, they have to be meaningful, they have to be goal oriented, and everybody has to know what's going on. But these discussions can lead to you reflecting upon your teaching and learning about what other teachers do in the classroom, or even getting them to come in and look at yourself and look at your teaching and see what they notice about your teaching and what you could improve. Because that's the biggest way we can all really learn is by having someone else come in and observe our teaching, or even videotaping yourself, because you really don't see what you do or what you say until you actually look at yourself teaching in front of the classroom. And then the implications in my personal classroom, one of the biggest ones is framing discussions. It can be really useful in conveying what you do in the classroom. This was the biggest one I learned when I was pursuing a master's degree in chemistry, in chemistry education, is that you really have to know how to convey what you're doing. You can't just use students' grades as a determiner as like, oh, they're a good teacher, because the students could be getting good grades, but they could be doing that by themselves, not from the teacher. So it's really important that we look at those observations and reflections. And again, having your peers evaluate your teaching in a meaningful way. I had this a lot where I'd ask people I knew, like my friends that were also teaching assistants, or people in my research group, to come just sit in on a couple classes, just if they had time, and see what they noticed about my teaching, because they had more experience than I did, and I wanted to see what they said about my teaching or what could be improved. And also using those 4 key domains in the framework, which were, again, planning and preparation, classroom environment, professional responsibilities, and instruction. Lastly, some criticisms in the framework that I've seen or read about so far is that teaching will always evolve, which allows the framework to evolve. So that's a good thing, actually, because using just the first form of the framework for teaching that occurs now will not necessarily work. So it's good that the framework is always evolving to what's going on in the classroom. Another criticism is that you could have people claiming to be expert observers, right? They read about this framework once, they think it's a great thing, but then all of a sudden they claim to be, oh, I can observe it, I can tell you what you're doing automatically. So it's really to be weary of those people who claim to be expert observers of the framework when in reality they're not. And then there's 2 sides of a coin right now in the next 2 bullet points, which is some people say you can't really know what good teaching is. Teaching is an art form, right? You can't put any sort of assessment